Hello, my name is Hannah, and let's talk books. I'm wearing a headband today because my hair has chose violence today and is quite staticky and keeps sticking to my freaking face. So I'm actually filming this on March 22nd because in 2 days we will be on a plane flying out of town. So not going to be able to read anymore this month, so I just wanted to get this filming out of the way because this will probably be the first video I edit when I get back, which that's going to feel very weird because a lot is going to have happened between now and then. Anyway, let's get right into it. The first book I read for March is Iron Widow by Zirin J. Zhao. This is a YA LGBT sci-fi. It came out last year in 2021, and I gave this 3 stars. So the author of this book is actually pretty popular on TikTok, and I think YouTube as well. I saw she had some videos, but I haven't watched them yet. But basically, she memed herself onto the bestseller lists, so she's definitely pretty interesting. But this book is essentially a revenge story about this 18-year-old woman named Zetian. She signs up to be a concubine pilot, which just sounds awful, to assassinate this really popular pilot that killed her older sister. So this world isn't our world, like this is fantasy world. And in this world, they build these mechs out of this alien race that is attacking them, and they then use those mechs to kill the alien race. And these mechs take a male and a female to pilot because like yin and yang kind of thing. But most of the time, the women end up dying from these experiences. However, Zetian is determined to change this very patriarchal world where women are essentially just batteries for these mechs. So this was 100% a 4-star read for me until the ending. I know I hate when that happens, but Zetian is preaching like this really feminist message throughout like the entire book, and at the end all of that just kind of gets thrown out the window. I know it's 100% like on purpose obviously and everything, but I just felt like everything that the characters had been standing for throughout the entire book just ended up being meaningless in the end, and it did a trope that I'm not a fan of anyway, and so I was just kind of like, really? We're going in that direction? Like, no, please. So I had to knock down a star for that because I just was not happy with the ending whatsoever. On the flip side, the beginning of this is brilliant. The author does a really good job of having you hate this world along with Zetian, so you're definitely like rooting for her throughout most of this. This story, it revolves around rage, revenge, like injustice, and it's just so brutal that I'm quite surprised this is only YA. But since this beginning is so strong, it does end up kind of dragging in the middle and feeling a bit repetitive. Because of that, I do wish there had been a bit more world building instead of more, I guess, of the action scenes, although obviously those are needed as well. I just feel like at the end, I didn't quite understand like the politics of this world. It's not our world, so you can't just like make assumptions. Pretty much all you end up knowing is like men rule the world kind of thing, and you don't really find out any of the intricacies of that. I do think this might have been done on purpose because of the ending, but I just can't be for sure. So I have not read The Hunger Games, but I've seen the movies, and the whole time I was reading this, I was getting major Hunger Games vibes. So if you do enjoy those books, this might be one to pick up. However, I did find like the layer upon layer upon layer of betrayal to just kind of be too much in the end. It just left me with like no one to root for at all. So one of the major selling points of this book is that it's about a polyamorous couple. Obviously like yay for representation and everything, and there's a few like good sentences about commentary on it and like being able to love multiple people at once kind of thing, but the actual like polyamory aspect is just so tiny in this book that I don't think it should be such a big marketing thing for it, and I do wish there was a bit more of it. But pretty much overall, this is like a very violent tale about standing up to the patriarchy. However, it turns into a completely different book by the end. Next is a book whose cover I absolutely hate. I got this at the book swap back a few weeks ago. Was it last month? I don't even know. But that is The Masker by Tori Peters. So yeah, you can see this is quite a cover. This is probably one of the worst covers I've ever seen. She is the author of Detransition Baby, which is a very popular book, so I was kind of surprised to see that she had written this. This is a LGBT novella, although I'm not even sure you can call it a novella because it's less than 70 pages, so it's just like a short story. This came out in 2016 and I gave it 2 stars. So I'm going to read the summary directly from Goodreads because I think that is the best summary of this. After a party on the Las Vegas Strip, a young sissy must choose between her internet fantasy of forced feminization at the hands of a mysterious handsome man or the difficult reality of transition with the help of a sisterly transsexual woman. So obviously this book is more geared toward people that have gone through a transition, going through transition, questioning their sexuality themselves, and that kind of thing. However, this needed to be proofread. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a story with so many grammatical errors, misspellings, missing words, added words, like, you name it, it was in here. Like, it really didn't even seem like the author had bothered to like reread what she had first wrote. But the amount of typos in this for how short it is just astronomical. This does say some interesting things about accepting ourselves for like who we are kind of deal. But then, on the other hand, it does say some questionable things about cis women, and that just kind of like rubbed me the wrong way a bit. I am completely supportive of the LGBTQIA community. I always never know if I should say the whole thing or shorten it just because it's so long, but I'm definitely supportive of that community. I am in that community. So, and I know the community can get a lot of hate and be bullied a lot, but I don't think the response to that is bullying cisgendered people. So that, I thought that was kind of out of place in here. But in the end, I honestly just kind of didn't really know what to think about this. It's an odd story, which is why I picked it up. I saw the cover and I was like, what in the world is this? Even though I hate the art. But you can definitely tell that this is probably one of the first forays into writing from the author. Next, I read White on White, which I told myself to look up the author's name before I did this and I completely forgot. But it's Askul Savas. I'm probably not saying that right at all. They actually did a talk at the library I go to, the American Library in Paris, which is how I first found out about this book. And it finally didn't have a huge waiting list, so I could read it. But this is literally fiction. It came out last year in 2021, and I gave this 2.5 stars. So not exactly a good start. But this book is about an unnamed student in an unnamed city, which for some reason I assumed was Italy. For some reason, when I read the description, I could have sworn it said it was in Italy. But it doesn't give any specifics about country or anything like that. But I mean, it could definitely be Italy based on how it reads. But the student is there to work on their research project about Gothic nudes, and they share an apartment, why am I having so much difficulty speaking, with an older woman named Agnes. And Agnes continually tells our narrator about stories from her life. This is pretty much a slice of life where nothing happens. The narrator is just kind of going about their day. They're like, I'm going to this church today, I'm going to that church today, I'm going to this library to do research. And whenever she happens to run into Agnes, Agnes tells her some anecdote about her life, some story about her children, things like that. From the description of this, I was expecting more outright emotion and like weirdness, quirkiness kind of thing. But this book is a lot more subtle than that, and only the very last page gave me what I had been looking for in this story. Also, like the title, White on White, it's about white paint on a white canvas. And so I thought that was going to be brought up a lot more than it was, and that it was going to be portrayed as being more strange than it was. But it was quite a normal scene, and you could actually like tell what the painting was. It wasn't just this extremely abstract thing where it's literally just white on white kind of thing. So this is a book about art. Expect that type of language to go along with it, especially since she's talking about Gothic art and going to cathedrals. Jeez. And stuff like that. There is quite a lot of talk about what she is studying. So if you know nothing about any of that, you might be a bit lost at some points, but I didn't find that bad at all. And to me, those were actually the most interesting parts of this book. Overall, it was an okay read, but I mean, I was just expecting something a bit more unusual and quirky, and it just didn't quite deliver on that. Next, I read the first book of poetry since Shel Silverstein back in elementary school. and that is The Carrying Poems by Ada Limon. And wow, this one is a lot more reflective. This is a book of poetry, all by her. Came out in 2018, and I gave it 3 stars. So obviously this is a collection of poems, all by the same author. It has to deal with like aging, infertility, and more kind of like slice of life moments. So I only picked this up based on the spine. Like, I was at the library with a friend, and we were standing by the poetry section, and I looked over and just kind of saw the spine, and I was like, oh, what's this? Gank. And I've always kind of been wanting to get into poetry a bit and just try it out, see if it's my thing of it. And so I decided to pick it up, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting. However, this turned out to be a bit different, though. It felt more like a short story. Like, each poem kind of contributed to an overall narrative about the author's life, and so it literally just felt like we were progressing through the author's life with her, and you could kind of see along the way how she changed like her thinking and her conclusions and stuff like that about life. Because of this, like the poems themselves, they can sound very different from each other. Like some of them are very like lyrical and have beautiful language, where others literally just read like a few paragraph short story kind of deal. I'm going to read my favorite poem from this, which actually is the very first poem. It's called A Name. When Eve walked among the animals and named them, nightingale, red-shouldered hawk, fiddler crab, fallow deer, I wonder if she ever wanted them to speak back, look into their wide, wonderful eyes and whispered, name me, name me. So there's those kind of poems. But then about halfway through the book, we get like this really hilarious gem, and it gives some of the craziest imagery I've ever come across. It's just the first section of the poem, but it really shows how varied this thing is, and I'm going to read that too. I have it written down. I'm not going to read it from the book. The night after, I dream I chop all the penises off, the ones that keep coming through the walls. And that really caught me off guard. So these 2 things were the highlights of the book for me. And like, as you can tell, it's very varied in how the poems are. But since the kind of highlights of the book were so few and far in between for me, this just kind of felt like an average read in the end. There are obviously definitely ones I liked more than others. And I also kind of caught myself a few times just reading the words and not exactly absorbing them. But that's also why I went through this slow, because I didn't want to get overwhelmed, and I wanted to really try to absorb the poems and kind of understand them. I do feel like poetry is a very personal medium, and that's the meaning you can get from poems, like it definitely varies from person to person. And that's kind of what makes it difficult to rate poetry, because it's basically you going on a personal journey while reading the poems, and that's just going to be so different from person to person. Next, we have a nonfiction book with a pretty long title. This is Monster She Wrote, The Women Who Pioneered Horror and Speculative Fiction by Lisa Kroger and Melanie Anderson. So like I said, this is nonfiction. It came out in 2019, and I gave this 4 stars. Also, look how bright that is showing up on here. I mean, it is basically like a neon green book. Look at that. I love this cover, and the inside art. Whoops, that's not the right one. Yeah, here it is. The inside art as well. Those doodles are like all throughout the book. It's pretty cool. Anyway, this book is not a deep dive. Like you can see, it's not like the longest thing ever. So don't go into this expecting like full biographies of the women or anything like that. This is pretty surface level and more of a list of books to add to your TBR. So this book is divided into a handful of sections depending on subgenres of horror. And the first few pages of each section is kind of like an intro to that genre. Then it goes through several authors. It gives a few pages of kind of like a mini biography on them, like what publishing house they wrote for if they did, what magazines their stuff was printed in, like who they married, where they grew up, things like that. And my phone memory was full, so I had to take care of that real quick. But anyway, as I was saying, at the end of each author's profile, there's like this reading list, and the categories are not to be missed, also try, and related work. And then the very last section of this book goes over each subgenre again, but talks about the modern writings of it, like today, who is writing it today, what are they doing, where's that subgenre going, kind of deal. As expected, I added a lot of books to my TBR. You'll see some familiar names in here, like Anne Rice and Shirley Jackson, of course, but there were plenty of authors in here that I had never heard about before. I rather enjoyed the style this is written in. It does make it feel like a quicker read, but I did read this in like smaller chunks so that I wouldn't get overloaded with like book names and titles and dates and stuff like that. What made this not a 5-star read is most of the time the descriptions of the books in here were spoiler free. Like there were several times where they're like, hey, we're not going to spoil this, so we'll stop talking about it there, kind of deal. But there was one instance where they revealed the plot twist and then right after in parentheses wrote in all caps spoiler. I'm just like, why would you do that? I don't care how old the book is. If you're trying to get me to read a book, don't spoil it for me. So that's the one thing that just really caught me off guard and kind of ticked me off for a moment in this. So that's why this is only 4 stars, not 5. Next, I read, oh god, another one with a giant glare. The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This is horror, thriller, mystery. Came out last year in 2021, and I gave this 5 stars. So I'm also going to read the summary directly from Goodreads because this is one of those books where it's very easy to accidentally say a spoiler because it's hard to describe it without saying any. So Goodreads says, in a boarded-up house on a dead-end street at the edge of the wild Washington woods lives a family of 3. A teenage girl who isn't allowed outside, not after last time. A man who drinks alone in front of his TV, trying to ignore the gaps in his memory. And a house cat who loves napping and reading the Bible. An unspeakable secret binds them together, but when a new neighbor moves in next door, what is buried out among the birch trees may come back to haunt them all. So just to brag for a moment, I guessed it. I got it right. My husband, who I also talked to a lot about this while I was reading it, also got it right. And he got it more fully right than I did, actually. Yeah, just a little bragging moment there. But this is one of those books where you are crafting theories from page 1. I love those type of books, so this was right up my alley immediately. The foreshadowing and detail are just fantastic. And this is actually a book where you could 100% reread it to try to catch even more details that you may have missed the first time around. But the one thing I absolutely love about this book that I think has been lacking in a lot of literature lately is everything is answered at the end. There are no open ends. And there was one point where I was thinking, oh, this is going to be a 4.5 instead of a 5 because, like, this part makes no sense and it's not explaining why. But then it explained it and it made sense. And I was like, yes, thank you, book. Thank you so much. But it was just explained so beautifully and just everything clicking into place felt so good. The one negative I have about this is there's a character in here, it's multi-POV. So there's a POV in here from a character called Dee Dee that I just felt wasn't needed. She felt severely underutilized and I just don't think affected the story that much in the end. It didn't like mess up my enjoyment of the book or anything like that. It's just something where I was just kind of like, huh. But overall for me, like this was an amazing read and I read it at the perfect time. Like I needed a 5-star read. And even though it's just March, this is my favorite book of the year so far, by far. Lastly, I read The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. This is a fantasy LGBTQIA+ novel, or novella, I mean. This came out in 2020 and I gave it 2.5 stars. So when a bandit leader, quotation marks, causes her to lose her job, a follower of the Pure Moon joins the band of men to follow the goddess's calling. After a botched negotiation, the stakes are raised as the group tries to avoid the authority known as the Mata, or Meta, I don't know, it's M-A-T-A, as well as other bandits. So going into this, I 100% thought this was a YA book, and that the characters were all teenagers. That is not the case though, and I am quite surprised by that. The interactions in the dialogue between all the characters is very juvenile. Like, I really thought they were like 15, 16. But then I had to do a double take when the MC said she was 25. So this is another kind of slice of life book, as this is just a snippet into the bandits' lives. Not much happens. There's a lot of talk about this religion that is the same name as the book. But pretty much this felt like a few chapters taken out of a larger book. it really seemed unfinished and kind of random, but it doesn't feel like its own contained story, really. The ending also felt like it came out of nowhere, which if you read this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. No spoilers here. There just wasn't a good lead up to that moment, and the characters' reactions all felt very anime. They were very over the top and just overacted kind of deal. Obviously the representation in this novella is great. That's always something that's good, but unfortunately everything around that just didn't hit the mark for me, and this just ended up being okay in the end. And that's everything I read in March, and I feel like I read quite a lot for it only being the 22nd. I don't know, I probably wouldn't have filmed this video already, but I'm literally not bringing any books with me on this trip. We're literally only taking backpacks. Like, I'm talking about normal backpacks, so no room for one. And two, I'm one of those people where if I'm reading on transport, I'm gonna get motion sick. So I'm not even bringing my tablet for like any ebooks or anything like that. So just, I'm not gonna be able to get any reading done. So that was the whole purpose of this. But thank you for hanging out with me, even though this seems like it might be a bit of a longer video based on how much I've been filming. But until next time, bonne journée and au revoir.